Amelia Rhodes, CEO of Crescent Heights Financial, had spent years reaching the top, only to walk into her own bank today as a customer, ready to confront a harsh reality: discrimination. After hearing countless complaints from clients of color, she decided to experience it firsthand. But what she uncovers goes far beyond bias. It reveals a shocking truth that could destroy everything she's worked for. Can you imagine being in her shoes? Ever faced something like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories. As she approached the counter, a young teller named Megan greeted her with a polite but slightly strained smile. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" "I'd like to make a withdrawal," Amelia said, sliding the slip across the counter. The amount was substantial, $120,000, far from unusual for someone in her position, but a sum that would get any bank employee's attention. Megan glanced at the withdrawal slip and immediately paused. She looked at the amount, then back at Amelia, her expression slightly faltering. "This is a large sum," Megan said, her voice just a little too cautious. "May I ask what the withdrawal is for?" Amelia tilted her head slightly, taking in the question, the subtext of it. "I don't think that's any of your business," she replied calmly. "I'm just here to access my own funds." Megan hesitated for a second, her fingers tapping nervously on the counter. She glanced over her shoulder at a colleague who was standing a few feet away. The silent exchange between them was unmistakable. They were assessing her, questioning her presence, her right to make such a withdrawal. Megan then turned back to Amelia, her voice now colder. "I'm afraid I'll need to check with my manager," Megan said, stepping away from the counter and calling over Carla Brooks, the branch manager. The moment Megan called for Carla, Amelia realized that this wasn't about security or protocol. It wasn't about the money or the legitimacy of her request. It was about something much deeper. Bias so ingrained that it had become invisible to the very people who perpetuated it. And today, they were going to see exactly what that bias looked like when it stood in front of them. Amelia stood motionless, her posture straight and her gaze unwavering. Carla arrived at the counter, a forced smile on her face. "Is there a problem with my request?" Amelia asked, her voice calm but with a sharpness that Carla couldn't ignore. "No, ma'am. It's just a large sum, and we need to follow standard procedures," Carla replied, but her tone didn't match her words. It was rehearsed, mechanical, and Amelia could hear the unease beneath it. "I've been a client of Crescent Heights for over 20 years, Amelia said, her voice unwavering. "I've never once caused a problem. I've been nothing but loyal to this institution, and yet, today, I'm being treated as if I don't have the right to my own money." Carla's eyes flickered with discomfort. She glanced at Megan and the other tellers who had gathered around, all of them now witnessing the subtle power dynamics at play. It was clear that this wasn't about a withdrawal. It wasn't about money. It was about power, perception, and the way people like Amelia were treated in spaces they had earned their right to occupy. "I'm just following procedure," Carla said, but the words were hollow, empty in a way that made Amelia's stomach churn. Amelia didn't flinch. She stood tall, looking Carla directly in the eye. "I don't need to explain myself to you, Carla," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm a customer of this bank, and I'm simply trying to access my own funds. If there's an issue with that, I'd like to speak with someone who has the authority to resolve it." Carla hesitated for a moment, but then she turned. Her steps hurried as she went to get Diane Porter, the head of operations. Diane was known for her no-nonsense approach and her strong commitment to fairness, especially when it came to issues of discrimination. Amelia knew Diane would handle this, but she also knew that this moment, this small, seemingly insignificant transaction, was bigger than any one person. It was about changing the culture of Crescent Heights once and for all. As Carla left too, "Fetch Diane." The tension in the lobby grew. Other customers, some of whom had been watching from a distance, began to murmur to each other. They could sense that something significant was unfolding, and Amelia, standing at the counter with her Arms crossed knew that this was a battle worth fighting, not just for her, but for every customer who had ever been made to feel small, inferior, or less than. As Carla made her way to the back office to get Diane, Amelia glanced around the room. A few customers were still waiting for their turn, but their attention was now fully on her. No one knew what that would be. The shift had begun, and Amelia knew that this was just the beginning. She wasn't going to let them off the hook. Not now. Not ever. Diane Porter entered the lobby with a confident stride. She was tall, composed, and exuded a quiet power that made even the most seasoned employees stand a little taller when she walked into a room. Amelia could feel the difference immediately. Where Carla had faltered under pressure, Diane stood unshaken. And that's exactly what Amelia needed. Someone who understood the weight of what was at stake. Someone who would not shy away from the hard truth. Amelia, Diane said with a nod of acknowledgement, her eyes locking onto the young CEO with clear respect. I've reviewed the situation. I'm sorry you've had to deal with this. Let's get this resolved right now. Carla, who had been standing off to the side, immediately stepped forward, attempting to explain herself. Diane, there's been some confusion regarding the withdrawal request. I didn't mean to make her feel uncomfortable, but it's just a large sum, and I need to be thorough. Diane didn't even look at Carla. The issue isn't the sum, Carla. It's the way we're treating our customers. This is about how we make people feel, not the numbers on a slip. Carla's expression stiffened. Amelia stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. I don't need to be made to feel like I'm not worthy of withdrawing my own money. I've been a loyal client for over 20 years, and this is how I'm treated. Diane nodded, her face hardening. This stops now, Amelia. I'm going to handle this, but I want you to know that this is just the first step. We're making immediate changes to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Carla, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to protest. But Diane, we've always followed procedure. There's never been an issue like this before. Diane turned to Carla, her expression unyielding. No, this isn't about procedure. This is about something much deeper. We've turned a blind eye to this kind of treatment for too long, and that's not going to happen anymore. Amelia could feel the tension ease slightly as Diane took control of the situation. But the twist wasn't just that Carla would be fired. It was that the whole institution was about to be held accountable for its past failures. Diane turned to the staff, her voice loud and clear as she addressed the others who had been silent witnesses to the unfolding scene. From this point forward, everyone will be held to a new standard. We will not tolerate discrimination at any level of our operations, whether it's from the teller counter or the executive suite. There will be training, there will be audits, and there will be consequences for anyone who cannot meet these standards. Diane turned to Amelia again. I'm sorry this happened to you, but I promise you, we're going to make this right. Amelia smiled, though her eyes remained sharp. This isn't about making it right just for me, Diane. This is about making it right for everyone who's ever walked into this branch and been treated differently because of their skin color or their background. This is about creating a system that values everyone equally. Diane nodded, her gaze steady. I agree, and I'm with you every step of the way. The quiet tension that followed Diane's arrival was palpable. Carla, once a trusted manager at Crescent Heights, had been swiftly dismissed, but the rest of the staff in the lobby stood frozen, unsure of how to move forward. Diane turned to the rest of the staff, her voice steady and clear. Everyone here needs to understand that what happened today is unacceptable, she said, making eye contact with the employees. This isn't just about one employee. This is about the culture we've allowed to fester. The behavior that was displayed here today is not who we are, and it will not be tolerated going forward. Amelia stood back, letting Diane speak. This wasn't her moment anymore. Diane was taking charge, and that was exactly what needed to happen. From today, Diane continued, her voice rising slightly, we will be implementing immediate changes. We'll be conducting a full internal audit of every department, branch, and employee. We'll be reviewing our hiring practices, our training protocols, and our customer service policies. and anyone who cannot comply with our new standards of respect and dignity will be held accountable." Amelia felt a small flicker of pride. Diane's words were exactly what she had hoped to hear: direct, powerful, and uncompromising. But the twist wasn't just about the staff or even the management. It was about the board of directors. Amelia knew that many of them had turned a blind eye to the very issues they were now forced to confront. And with the spotlight now firmly on Crescent Heights, it wasn't just the employees who would be held accountable. It was the board that would have to reckon with their own complacency. Diane paused for a moment, letting the gravity of her words sink in. "Amelia," she said, turning to face the CEO, "we've got work to do. The board needs to make a commitment, too. We need to involve them in this process, ensure they understand that this is not just a matter of policy. This is about a fundamental shift in the way we operate as a company." Amelia nodded, her mind already racing with what needed to be done next. "I agree. The board has been complicit in allowing this to continue for far too long. They're going to have to be part of the solution. If they're not, then nothing will truly change." Diane looked thoughtful. "I'll set up a meeting with them, but we need to be prepared for resistance. They may not be as eager for change as we are." Amelia's eyes narrowed. "Let me handle the board. I've spent years earning their trust. Now it's time for them to earn mine." The stakes had just gotten higher. The board would be the final hurdle in the battle for real change, and if they didn't step up, Amelia was prepared to make them a part of the past. Just like Carla, Equineris. The employees quietly returned to their work. The atmosphere in the lobby was undeniably different. The staff who had previously avoided eye contact with Amelia now glanced at her with a mixture of guilt and uncertainty. Amelia turned to Diane, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "We need to start from the top down. The training and audits are important, but I want to go further. I want the board to be involved in this process, not just as decision-makers but as active participants. If they're serious about creating a more inclusive environment, they need to take part in the very changes we're implementing." Diane's eyes flashed with understanding. "I'll make sure they're held accountable. But you're right, this has to be a company-wide effort, from the bottom to the top." Amelia nodded. "This isn't just about firing Carla. It's about building something new, a system where everyone is treated with dignity, where everyone's contributions are valued." But even as the changes started to take shape, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that the biggest battle was yet to come. Would the customers believe in the changes? Would they trust the promises that were being made? Or would the years of bias and mistreatment prove too much to overcome? As Amelia stood in the lobby, watching the staff return to their stations, she knew that the real test wasn't just going to come from within the bank. It was going to come from the outside world, and now she was going to make sure that the people who had helped her get there, everyone from her customers to her employees, would be treated with the respect they deserved. The storm had only just begun, and the ripple effects of Amelia's actions were about to shake Crescent Heights Financial to its core. The next few days at Crescent Heights Financial were filled with a tension that was impossible to ignore. Diane, Amelia, and the rest of the leadership team had sprung into action, pushing forward with the internal audit and the implementation of new policies. But as the immediate aftermath of Carla's dismissal began to settle, the true magnitude of what Amelia had started began to unfold. Amelia knew that Carla was just one part of the puzzle. She had been the most visible example of the systemic bias that plagued Crescent Heights, but there were others. Employees at every level, from tellers to branch managers, had allowed their biases to slip through the cracks, either consciously or unconsciously. The most difficult part of the battle was yet to come, confronting those who had quietly enabled the culture of discrimination to continue, and making sure the changes they were pushing for were more than just cosmetic. Amelia sat in her office, late one evening, reviewing reports and taking notes. The data from the internal audits was troubling. It revealed a disturbing trend across the bank. Certain branches, particularly those in more diverse areas, had consistently lower customer satisfaction scores. Complaints about mistreatment, whether overt or subtle, were more common in these. locations. The evidence was right in front of her, and it was clear that this issue wasn't just isolated to one branch. It was systemic. She was jolted from her thoughts by a knock on the door. "Come in," she called. Diane entered, her expression grim. "Amelia, we need to talk. The board is getting nervous." Amelia leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. She had known this moment would come. The board, who had been quick to support her in the aftermath of the incident at the downtown branch, was now feeling the heat. The ripple effect was real. Changes in the workplace, particularly those tied to sensitive issues like discrimination, had the potential to upset profits and create internal unrest. They didn't understand, or perhaps didn't want to accept, that this was a necessary evolution, not just a public relations fix. "What do you mean, nervous?" Amelia asked, her voice steady. Diane sat across from her. "They're worried about the backlash. The customers, especially the more affluent ones, may not support these changes. We've already had a few high-net-worth clients threatening to pull their business over the changes we're implementing. They feel like we're rocking the boat." Amelia took a deep breath, her jaw tightening slightly. "Tell the board they have a choice. They can either change or they can stay in the past. But we're not turning back now." Diane nodded, but there was concern in her eyes. "I'll tell them that, but I'm not sure they're ready for the level of commitment this is going to require. The operational costs alone for the anti-bias training and restructuring are going to be significant." The twist was that Amelia had already anticipated this resistance. She had expected the board to fight back, to push against the very changes that she knew would shape Crescent Heights into a better institution. But what she hadn't expected was the personal attacks that would come next, not just against her leadership, but against her character. The subtle whispers of doubt that started to spread through the bank's leadership made her realize that not everyone was on her side. "I didn't come here to please the board," Amelia said, her voice low but firm. "I came here to make sure that every person who walks into this bank feels respected and valued. If the board can't support that, then I'll find someone who will." Diane hesitated before speaking again. "There's more. I think you should hear this firsthand." Amelia raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Diane pulled out her phone and opened an email. "It's a letter from one of the branch managers. They've sent their resignation. They say they can't support these changes, and we've been hearing rumblings from others about leaving as well. It's not just the clients, it's some of the staff too." Amelia took the phone and read the email quickly. The manager, a seasoned employee who had been with Crescent Heights for over a decade, expressed concerns about how the changes would affect the branch's performance. The message was filled with coded language that suggested the real issue wasn't the changes themselves, but the people those changes were aimed at. The cracks were showing. And now, Amelia faced a choice. Either compromise on her vision for the bank's future, or double down and face the full brunt of the pushback. Amelia felt a surge of frustration, but she quickly controlled it. "This is exactly what I expected. People will always resist change, especially when it challenges their comfort zone. But we're not backing down." She stood up from her desk, walking over to the window that overlooked the city. The skyline was lit up against the night, a symbol of the power and wealth that Crescent Heights had built. But the institution, like the city, had its flaws. It was time to tear down the old foundations and rebuild on stronger, more inclusive ground. "I won't apologize for making these changes," Amelia said, her back to Diane. "We've already lost so many customers, due to our failures. The ones who leave because of this, they weren't the ones we were trying to reach. They're not our future." Diane remained silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of Amelia's words. "I'll go to the board," she said. "I'll remind them of what's at stake. But, Amelia, we have to be prepared for the fallout. This isn't going to be easy." Amelia turned around, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm ready for it." The fallout came quicker than expected. That night, an anonymous post appeared on a well-known financial industry forum. The title read, "Crescent Heights Financial's New CEO, A Radical Approach or Corporate Suicide." The Post criticized Amelia's push for inclusivity, calling her leadership style too progressive and questioning whether the bank would survive under her direction. What Amelia hadn't anticipated was that the backlash would go public so quickly. The battle for Crescent Heights' future was no longer just an internal issue. It had become a public spectacle. And now, the entire world was watching to see if Amelia's vision would succeed or collapse under the pressure. Chiindian. Next few days were filled with mounting tension as the resistance from within Crescent Heights Financial grew louder. Amelia had anticipated some pushback, but the backlash came much quicker and with much more force than she had expected. The anonymous post that had appeared on the Financial Forum was just the beginning. The news spread like wildfire, sparking debates across industry blogs, social media, and financial publications. The question on everyone's mind was the same. Would Crescent Heights Financial survive the radical changes being pushed by its new CEO, Amelia Rhodes? Some critics claimed that Amelia's push for diversity and inclusion would cause the bank to lose its competitive edge, alienating high-net-worth clients and disrupting long-standing relationships with wealthy investors. But what those critics failed to see was that Amelia wasn't just shaking the foundations of the bank. She was building something better. But now, as the backlash intensified, Amelia had to prove to herself, to her staff, and to the world that this wasn't a momentary trend. This was a movement. In a late-night meeting with Diane, Amelia laid out her strategy for the next steps. "We've already seen the first wave of resistance," Amelia said, her voice steady despite the pressure she was feeling. "Now it's time to show them we're serious." Diane, who had been at the forefront of the changes from the very beginning, nodded. "I agree. But it's not just about proving a point anymore. It's about survival. We need to take this to the next level, and we need to bring the board on board." Amelia had already anticipated this. The board, while initially supportive, was now questioning whether they should scale back the changes in the wake of the public backlash. There were murmurs of executives who felt uncomfortable with the direction Amelia was taking. Some, even, suggested that a more moderate approach could help the bank regain some of its affluent clientele who were threatening to leave. But Amelia wasn't interested in compromise. Not this time. The twist came when Diane received an urgent call from the head of operations at one of Crescent Heights' flagship branches. "We've got a serious issue," the voice on the phone said. "A group of our top-tier clients are threatening to pull their business unless we backpedal on these changes. They want assurances that their personal bankers will be given more authority, and they're demanding that the diversity programs be shelved." The stakes had just gotten higher. The very clients that Crescent Heights had built its reputation on were now in revolt. But Amelia had known this would happen. She had known that the people who had benefited the most from the old system, the ones who felt entitled to their wealth and power, would fight the hardest to keep things the way they were. "I'll handle it," Amelia said, her voice firm as she set her jaw. "This is where we draw the line. We can't give in to this pressure. We're not going to be intimidated into changing course." Diane paused for a moment, then spoke. "Are you sure? These are some of our biggest clients. Losing them would hurt. It would be a huge blow to the bank's profits." Amelia's gaze hardened. "This isn't about profits, Diane. This is about creating a bank where every client, no matter their background, feels equally valued. We can't keep bending to the will of the powerful few at the expense of the many." The battle was no longer just about saving the bank. It was about redefining what success looked like. Amelia knew this would cost her. She knew it would cost Crescent Heights, too. But the question was, could they afford to lose the clients who would only ever see them as a business that catered to a select few? The following morning, the board met for an emergency session. Amelia entered the room with her head held high, her mind clear and her resolve unshaken. She knew the battle ahead wasn't going to be easy, but she had come too far to back down now. Jonathan Prescott, the chairman of the board, was the first to speak. "Amelia, we need to address the situation with our clients. There's a serious risk that our reputation is going to take a hit. We've already lost some of our high-net-worth clients, and we've heard from more who are considering pulling their business if we continue down this path." Amelia looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every board member. "I understand the concern," she began, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "But we're not going to backtrack. We're going to move forward with the changes, and we're going to do it with the full support of the board. If we can't stand by these changes now, then we've failed, not just as a company, but as an institution that serves all people, regardless of their background." A heavy silence filled the room as the board members exchanged glances. The tension was thick, the stakes higher than ever. Finally, Diane spoke. "Amelia's right. We've already seen the impact of these changes. The people we've lost weren't the kind of clients we wanted. We need to be proactive, not reactive. If we don't change now, we risk being left behind in an industry that's evolving." Amelia looked directly at Jonathan. "This is where we decide what kind of company we want to be. If we want to be a bank that caters only to the wealthy few, then we're making a grave mistake. We need to step up and show that we're committed to a future where equality and respect are the foundation of everything we do." The room fell silent again. The weight of Amelia's words was undeniable, and after a long, drawn-out pause, Jonathan spoke. "I'll back you," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "We all will." The board had finally come around. They understood that this wasn't just about saving face. It was about survival, about building a legacy that would stand the test of time. Amelia had won the board's support, but the hardest part was still ahead. It wasn't just about policy changes. It was about rebuilding trust. Trust that had been lost and never truly earned by the old ways of doing business. As the meeting adjourned, Amelia sat back in her chair, a momentary sense of relief washing over her. But she knew the battle wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. The real test wasn't whether Crescent Heights Financial would change. It was whether the rest of the financial world would follow. And Amelia Rhodes was about to make sure they did. Amelia sat at her desk late that night reviewing the latest reports and emails. The last few days had been a whirlwind of strategy meetings, board sessions, and press conferences. Crescent Heights Financial was no longer just the bank she had built. It was becoming a symbol for the future of banking. The entire industry was watching, waiting to see if her bold decisions would pay off or if they would crash and burn. Her phone buzzed with a new email notification. It was from Diane. "The board's on board. We're ready to roll out the next phase." Amelia read the email and smiled. The resistance from the board had been fierce, but they had finally come around. They understood that this wasn't just about public image. It was about survival. The world was changing, and Crescent Heights had to change with it. Amelia's vision for the bank's future was starting to take shape, and it was beginning to look like a reality. As she glanced out of her office window at the city lights below, a deep sense of pride washed over her. She had fought for this moment, faced the pushback, and stood firm against those who tried to pull her back into the past. But now, it was time for action. The bank's new initiatives, anti-bias training for every employee, an overhaul of the hiring process, new performance metrics focused on diversity and inclusion, were ready to be rolled out across every branch, every department. The changes would start at the top, but they would filter down to every level of the company. Crescent Heights wasn't just going to be a place where people worked. It was going to be a place where people were treated fairly, where every employee was given the same opportunities to succeed. Amelia took a deep breath, standing from her desk. It was time to make the call. She picked up her phone and dialed Diane's number. "Diane," Amelia said when she picked up, "I think it's time for our announcement. Let's make the industry sit up and take notice. We're not just changing Crescent Heights, we're changing banking itself." Diane's voice came through, filled with the same resolve that Amelia had heard in her from the start. "I'm with you every step of the way. Let's do this." But even as Amelia prepared to make the official announcement, she knew that the real challenge lay ahead. The public would be watching closely, waiting for any misstep, any sign of weakness. The pressure was mounting, and the question wasn't whether Crescent Heights would change. It was whether Amelia would be able to follow through with the sweeping transformation she had promised. The press conference was set for the following week. Amelia, Diane, and the board members had worked together on the messaging, carefully crafting a statement that would make the bank's mission clear. They would announce not only their commitment to inclusion, but also their new initiative, the Equity in Banking Initiative, a plan to ensure that every customer, no matter their background, would receive the same level of service and respect. The night before the press conference, Amelia reviewed her speech one last time. She had spoken to thousands of people in her career, but tomorrow's audience was different. Tomorrow, the world would be watching. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment that would define her legacy as CEO. The morning of the press conference, Amelia stood backstage looking out at the sea of journalists, cameras, and microphones. She was joined by Diane and Jonathan Prescott, the chairman of the board. The tension in the room was palpable, but Amelia remained calm. She had been here before, and she knew that today wasn't about her. It was about something much bigger, about changing the culture of an entire industry. When it was time to step up to the podium, Amelia walked out confidently, her eyes scanning the room. The cameras flashed as the crowd hushed, waiting for her to speak. She smiled briefly before launching into her speech. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "Today marks a new chapter for Crescent Heights Financial. Today, we announce our commitment to creating a more equitable banking system, one where every customer, regardless of their race, gender, or socioeconomic status, will receive the same level of respect and service." She paused for a moment, allowing the words to sink in. "We are launching the Equity in Banking Initiative, a comprehensive program that will include mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, an overhaul of our hiring practices, and new policies to ensure that our clients are treated fairly. Every single one of them. This is not just a promise. This is a commitment." The cameras continued to flash as the room erupted in murmurs. Amelia could feel the weight of the moment, but she held her ground, her voice growing stronger with every word. For too long, the banking industry has turned a blind eye to the disparities in customer service. For too long, we've allowed bias to go unchallenged. But today, Crescent Heights Financial is leading the way. We are setting a new standard for the industry, and we are calling on other financial institutions to join us. Amelia's words were bold, but they were backed by the plans and policies that had already been put into place. She was making her vision for the future clear, and she wasn't backing down. We are going to make banking more inclusive. We are going to make sure that every customer, no matter who they are or where they come from, is treated with dignity and respect. That is the foundation of Crescent Heights Financial. And if you don't agree with that, then this institution is not for you. As Amelia finished her speech, she knew that this was the beginning of a new era. But even as she left the stage, the road ahead was unclear. Would the industry follow? Would the customers trust them? Or would the backlash continue to grow? Amelia stepped away from the podium, her heart racing as the crowd erupted in applause. She felt the weight of the moment. The speech was over, but the real work had just begun. The world would be watching, waiting to see if Crescent Heights could live up to its promises. As Amelia walked off the stage, she caught sight of the first of the major financial institutions reaching out to discuss partnerships for the Equity in Banking Initiative. The phone was already buzzing with calls. The ripple effect had begun, but it wasn't just about Crescent Heights anymore. It was about changing the entire industry. Amelia smiled to herself. The road ahead would be long, but she was ready. She had started something much bigger than herself. The real change was only just beginning.